So on the macro side of the economy, we would want to be able to show what happens throughout the business cycle. So we would be looking at GDP over time, and so that's how we would label our axes. Now, what most economies will want as one of their objectives, in fact, many economies and governments within economies set this as a clear objective, is that they would like their economy to grow in a steady and sustainable fashion. Booms and slumps can be quite destructive in economies, and so steady and sustainable economic growth it is very much what the governments of many developed economies and developing economies will want to see. And so what we could say is, if we were to draw that, we would want to see a trend line for economic growth over time to be steady and sustainable over time, so a gradual increasing level of GDP. However, economies tend to go in a very cyclical fashion. And so it is possible to see that, let's say if we start at time period 0 here, that you could have a position where your economy is growing faster than the trend, and it reaches a point where it starts to slump, and your economy may well go into recession, and it then may well recover, and you may well go into another period of boom. Now, economies can take many years to go through these, or they can happen in quick successions. If you look at recent UK government history and economic history of the UK, the period after Margaret Thatcher's Conservative government came into power in 1979 saw very much a recessionary period caused by quite strict monetary policy. Whereas we saw at the end of that decade the Lawson boom caused by policies implemented under the then Chancellor Nigel Lawson. You can see economies go through these booms and slump periods, and they can be very shallow and can take a number of years, but you could also see a number of peaks and troughs in very, very quick succession. Gordon Brown, another ex-chancellor, was the chancellor that said no more boom and bust, i.e. we wanted a situation where we didn't have these cyclical movements. However, if we were going to label our diagram here, this would be a period when the economy is in boom. This would be a point where the economy was in recession. Now, we'll know that our definition for recession is 2 successive quarters of negative GDP growth. And so you can see that you can technically be into a recession within half a year. Now, this is our actual output. So we would label the bendy line actual output as opposed to trend output. We'd also want to label some other key points. So here we have what is known as a positive output gap, This is when you have output that exceeds the trend. And clearly here we're going to have the opposite. So here we have what is known as a negative output gap. And this is where output is below where we might have imagined it might be when we were considering the trend. So that is a business cycle, as I say. If you look at a 20 to 30 year period across a country's economic performance, you will see those cyclical movements, perhaps not looking quite as neat and as symmetrical as I've drawn, but you'll see that happen. What you could also use this diagram for, and I mean, certainly if you're in the second year of your economic study and you want to really show your understanding, you could link this here to your understanding of ADAS, and you could be showing via a ADAS diagram that you are seeing a period where perhaps aggregate demand is outstripping aggregate supply, and it may well be that you're causing the economy to grow, and you could show the alternative at a negative output gap. You can also use this diagram to show how the government wants to potentially flatten out those booms and busts. So the dotted line that I'm drawing here, you should be able to see is what I'm trying to show you here is flattening out the business cycle. And so the government can use contractionary fiscal or monetary policy potentially when you are booming. Perhaps the government is concerned about demand pull inflation and wants to lessen the impact of a boom period, and perhaps it wants to move away from this boom bust idea. And maybe if there is a negative output gap, and we certainly saw this after the 2008 global financial crisis, because of the fears that the economy may plunge into a quite pronounced recession. There has been some attempt through expansionary monetary policies such as QE, quantitative easing, to lessen the impact of the recession. So a well-drawn business cycle diagram can be used to link together several aspects of aggregate demand and supply, such as ADAS with the business cycle, but also production possibility frontiers, which is a diagram obviously that's very much linked to theme 1.